All right, I'm going to share with you exactly what I've done to gain substantial strength, specifically in my arms, going from the 40-pound dumbbell all the way up to the 120-pound dumbbell recently, behind the head, extending over above. Absolute madness. And I'm going to get into whether or not strength gain or chasing a pump is more important for muscle growth overall. And as recently, the recent trend, I'm going to address a question here from Vegas 911. Who's having trouble gaining strength in their biceps. I'm really struggling with biceps, so I started with 2 exercises, 2 sets, each 2 times a week, which would equate to 4 sets per exercise with a training frequency of twice a week. Noticing not making any progress with the weight or reps, doesn't mention the time frame, so we don't know exactly how patient Vegas 911 is. They go on to say they thought maybe that's too much volume and I'm not recovering enough, question mark. So goes on to lower it to 1 exercise 2 times a week, 2 sets 2 times a week. So now you're just doing 2 sets per workout twice a week. Still no progress. Goes all the way down to 1 set twice a week and then starts to see some progress. Manages to bump that 12 kg dumbbell up from 6 reps to 9 reps. Gained a little bit of girth on the arms. Congratulations, that's awesome work. And then eventually stalls out again. Wants to know what could I do to potentially see more growth. So I've got 5 things here that I've seen to help me. And we're going to talk a little bit about the missteps that I think Vegas 911 is making. So cheers to making more gains. Number 1 is that you need to be patient because it takes a long time. Take my personal case, for example. Started off with a 40-pound dumbbell. We're working in the 10 to 15 rep range. This was a little over 3 years ago. 3 years and 4 months. So it's going to be 40 months that it took me to go from the 40-pound dumbbell to the 120-pound dumbbell. So I gained 80 pounds to this lift, but it took 40 months. So some quick maths here. 80 divided by 40 is 2. So that's 2 pounds a month. And since I'm using the dumbbell, I'm going up in increments of 5, right? I start with the 40, and then once I can get 15 reps, that's a pretty high rep count, I'm going to bump up to the 45. And then slowly work my way up there and repeat that over and over and over again like a freaking cycle. Let's close the top of the earth. Conceal the treasure that lays within the earth's core. So 2 pounds a month of gain on average. So that means that it took me at least 2 months to up the weight to gain 5 pounds, because that would be 2 months would take 4 pounds. So every 2 months or more, I would go up a dumbbell on average over this time span. So that gives you a perspective of, 2 or 2.5 months, I might be using the same dumbbell, maybe adding a rep here, a rep there, but a lot of the workouts I'm showing up and doing the exact same thing over and over again. So the first thing I would say, if you're relating with Vegas 911 here, is that you got to be a little bit more patient. It seems, I'm just assuming, I don't know, but it seems that there isn't enough patience and that you got to realize that it might take a month where you only add a rep or 2, that whole month. And then you just have to continue stacking that up over time. So having realistic expectations is number 1. And I'm just sharing with you my personal experience. You see that, wow, I'm strong with a 120-pound dumbbell. Well, it was a lot of just repeat slogging along. And most workouts, you don't really see a ton of progress. The second thing is to use a fast, explosive tempo. I found more than anything, this drastically allowed me to gain more strength. And so you can see in the sets that I'm showing here that I'm adding a little bit of zip, particularly to the concentric. So with the biceps, when you curl the weight up, add a little bit of pep to it. For whatever reason, that has allowed me to progress the movement a lot more. Even if then later on I slow the tempo down, I'm stronger with a slower tempo than I was before. The overall strength gain is substantially more. A key little caveat to keep in mind though is that you don't want your form to get too out of control, and I've definitely done that at times when you're doing explosive tempo. You still want to control the weight as much as you can, and these sets that I'm showing with the 120 I think are a good example of what the tempo should look like. The form's not perfect, but it's pretty reasonable. I'm purposely not locking out all the way. I don't want to do that last 10 or 20% of the rep. I don't think it's very effective. There's not much tension on the tricep. It ruins the rhythm, everything else. But using that fast, explosive tempo is going to help. Number 3 is the use of an extended rest time paired with superset. So if you're trying to gain strength, in this case in your arms, you should 100% superset your biceps and triceps. That is non-negotiable. There's no reason to not do that. So when you pick your biceps movement and you do your first, let's say you start with biceps, you do your first set, all out to failure, get whatever reps with whatever weight you're using, then I would recommend resting 2 to 5 minutes and then doing your first set of triceps the same and resting another 2 to 5 minutes. The reason being is that this way you allow for the muscle to come closer to full recovery. So the second round, the third round, the fourth round, however many rounds of the superset you end up doing, you can push closer to your maximum output each round because the fatigue from one set is not carrying over to the next set as significantly because we're utilizing an extended rest window, the 2 to 5 minute range. And if you're really detail orientated, you'll notice that the biceps is getting 4 to 10 minutes rest plus whatever time it took you to do the triceps, because you do your biceps, then you rest, let's say 3 minutes, then you do your triceps, and you rest another 3 minutes, so that's 6 minutes of rest, plus it took you 30 seconds to do the frickin' triceps set, so you got 6.5 minutes of rest to allow that muscle to come close to full recovery so you can push close to your maximum. Again, I found that was an extremely effective structure for adding strength. Number 4 is to just pick one exercise and do 2 to 5 rounds with it, or let's say 2 exercises, one for your biceps, one for your triceps. Or if you're training chest and back, I would superset 2 exercises together as well, and utilize that higher rest time and stick with that movement or movements for an extended period of time. Doesn't mean you need to do what I did and do 40 months straight of dumbbell behind the head tricep extensions. I have some limitations and other reasons behind that. I would probably vary the movement a little bit, but I think it's better to be a specialist in that movement if you really want to add strength. And just doing all of your sets with that one movement or those 2 movements is what I would recommend. In this case, Vegas 911, you're doing 2 different exercises. For now, I would just get rid of that and pick one, and I would stick with doing 4 rounds or 4 sets for your biceps. I'm going to get into that more afterwards, after I get through my list here. But I think it allows you to track and progress better. And if you do one exercise and then another and then another, and you're trying to progress all of them, by the second exercise and the third exercise, you're not really fresh. And then if you switch those around or you're changing and moving things around, it's just hard to track. That's why I think just stick with one movement for your bis, one movement for your tris, superset back and forth, rest an extended period, and do 2 to 5 rounds of that, whatever is going to work for you, 3 or 4 of them, something like that, and just keep doing that over and over again. I know it sounds a bit monotonous. If you wanted to, you could have 2 separate arm days or whatever muscle you're training where you have 2 other movements. For example, for biceps, let's say one day I do the dumbbell French press and standing barbell curls, and I do 4 rounds of that, pushing to the maximum, and then my next arm day comes around and I have a different set of exercises. In this case, let's say it's going to be the tricep push downs with a rope, and then dumbbell preacher curl, and I pair those together, and I alternate back and forth. So I have a little bit more variety, so you're not getting as bored, but it's still consistent. The movements still stay consistent. Or you could stick with a movement for like 3 months and then switch to another one, and then come back to it. But you need to have some consistency in the movements, I believe, if you really want to optimize your strength gain. I believe this would be number 5. Is to, excuse me, work in a higher rep range. So in this case, Vegas starts with 6 reps and is trying to add additional reps to that. And the reason that I think using, let's say, the 10 to 20 rep range, mostly 10 to 15, but I would go 15 plus a lot of the time, is it's easier to add an additional rep because the margin of improvement is smaller. So if you're failing, let's say, I'm failing, with the 90-pound dumbbell, getting 15 reps for triceps extensions behind my head, to add a 16th rep, the margin of improvement is much smaller than if I was to use, let's say, a 110-pound dumbbell where I'm failing at 8 reps. To add that 9th rep, that's much more significant improvement. To go from I fail at 8 reps with 110 pounds to add 1 more rep to that, that's a way more substantial improvement than to say I fail at 15 reps with whatever weight and to add 1 more rep to that. Right? And if you took it to the extreme, if like, I fail at 25 reps here, to get a 26th rep is not that big of a deal. Whereas the opposite of like, this is my 3 rep max for whatever lift, to add 1 more rep to that is really substantial. And it may take 3 or 4 months to add 1 rep if you're in a really low rep range. So your metric of improvement is such that it's a substantial margin to add an additional rep, where you're not going to see an additional rep very often if you're in a lower rep range. Whereas if you're in a bit of a higher rep range, that additional rep might come, you might get one once every couple weeks and feel like you're progressing more. Whereas if you're just staying in the 6 to 8 rep range, let's say, you may be making progress, but you're carving out that 7th rep over weeks, potentially months of staying consistent and pushing, and you don't see any of that improvement. So it can be demotivating because it feels like you're not getting any better, but you actually are. To reference again, my progress over these 3+ years, it would take me, I'd be stuck at a certain weight for 2.5 months. And sometimes it feels like I'm not making progress, but then you stretch that out over 3.5 years, I've made tons of progress to go from 40 pounds to 120 pounds. But that on a day-to-day, week-to-week, you don't really see progress. And a way to kind of alleviate some of that pressure to give yourself a little bit more motivation, operating in a higher rep range. Also, I think that when you're using a faster explosive tempo, you can utilize whatever benefit that is in the fast explosive tempo if you use a bit of a higher rep range. If you're using fast explosive tempo for 6 reps, you can't really, in the words of Eric Bugenhagen, horse cock the weight around that good. It's hard to really get it moving because it's so freaking heavy. You're just like under load, just like, ugh. Whereas if you're going for, if your failure point is around 15 reps, let's say, you can get some good pace going, some good explosiveness. And I believe that adding some of that explosiveness to your lift trains the muscles to be stronger. No scientific evidence provided. That's just my own personal experience. Going from training with a regular tempo to a fast explosive tempo, I saw a complete different result in the amount of strength I was able to gain. And the last one, which would be point 6, would be to periodize your rep range and tempo. Meaning, if you always operate in the 10 to 12 rep range with a certain weight and you're stuck progressing that, just switch to the 15 to 18 rep range. Lower the weight and just work on progressing your strength in that rep range for a month. And then come back. So if you're really stuck somewhere for like 3 months straight, change the rep range. As long as you're trained to failure, you're still going to be gaining strength. The weight may go down or up depending whether you go into a higher rep range or a lower rep range, but changing that rep range periodically can be an effective tool to use, and also tempo as well. I know I'm recommending a fast explosive tempo, and I think you should do that most of the time, but I've also had phases where then I will kind of transition out of that for a month or two where I use a slower tempo with lighter weights, and then I'll come back to the heavier weight with the faster tempo again. So I think having some periodization with your rep ranges and your tempo is an additional layer that you can add on this journey as you're slowly progressing. So those are the 6 things that I think have helped me to gain substantial strength in my triceps as well as my biceps. I'm not highlighting the numbers, but specifically the triceps over the past 3+ years. Now, to address something else that Vegas 911 is pointing out here, the mechanism of strength gain this individual is assuming is to do with recovery and volume. And so when they're not seeing progress with 8 sets a week, they back the volume off and then back the volume off more. And I think this is probably a misidentification of what the limiting factor is. And to me, unless you have some issue that's impeding your body's recovery, that 8 sets a week for your biceps is not overtraining leading to the point where you can't gain strength. I would be shocked. That would be a very rare scenario. And I think this is kind of in the Mike Mentzer school of thought, where the idea that he promotes is that, if you don't gain muscle or if you don't gain strength, that you either need to train more like a berserker in the 1 or 2 sets you do, or you need to add additional days of recovery. And speaking from experience, adopting that methodology early on in my training journey and believing it just full stock, which is a commonplace thing to do. And if you're familiar with the channel here, this is something that I encourage you to do all the time, is to question the information given from me or whoever else you're absorbing fitness information from, is to not assume it's true until you see what effect it has on your body first. But over time, I found that sort of Mentzer promoted way of training was not actually as productive for me. And that the limiting thing to gain strength or muscle was not that I just needed to up my set intensity solely and add extra days of recovery. I would say it's other things like I've listed in the 6 points here, of a faster tempo, using a longer rest time, sticking consistently with 1 or 2 exercises for each muscle at a time, or one exercise for each muscle. Utilizing a higher rep range so you can get a faster tempo going, periodizing, and then your rep range and your tempo, and then realizing that it just takes a long ass time to actually make progress. I think those things are stuff that you should check, Vegas 911. And I would add additionally to this is your training intensity. I think personally, I've seen it very difficult to gain substantial strength or muscle if I don't push at least the majority of my sets to absolute blitzkrieg failure. And so if you go in time after time doing your biceps and you kind of get close to failing and you just stop, you say, dang, I can't do another one, I don't think that you're adding enough of the secret special spice to stimulate more growth. I think that you need to amp yourself up and attack each set. Where when I'm doing the heavy ass weight with the triceps, like I'm not just going into it, like I have to rev my whole central nervous system up to get ready to handle some heavy ass weight. Otherwise it's not gonna go well. So I got the tunes in, I'm psyching myself up, I do all my warm-up sets, and I'm like revving myself up where like, I would say there's a bit of like a fight or flight activation where my vision kind of narrows and I'm not really noticing things around me because I'm about to move some fucking heavy ass weight and there's like some threat of like, I don't know, if this doesn't go well, like where's this dumbbell going and all this shit. So I think being able to kind of tap into an additional gear with intensity and focus can fuel a lot of additional progress. And if you're stuck, I think that's something you need to look at as well to make sure that you are checking that box and then going through the 6 things I've suggested. And you can get to a point where you are doing too much volume to gain strength. But this is already such a low amount of volume that I don't think this is necessarily what's actually causing the lack of strength gain. I think it probably lays somewhere in one of the 6 things I mentioned or the intensity. So that's my advice to you, Vegas 911. I would stick with the 2 exercises. I would just make it 1 exercise for 4 sets twice a week. 1 for tries, one for buys, and superset them together and do all this other stuff. And there's no reason that you shouldn't see progress. And if you're still not, I don't know what's going on personally with you, then I think there's potentially some type of health or lifestyle issue that's impeding your body. Because if your body is even reasonably healthy, and the biceps are such a small muscle, there's no reason that you're doing too much volume to recover and not gain strength. I think it's something else. And that kind of points to this other view that if you step out of the Menser type of ideology, there's multiple different things that are going to contribute to whether or not you gain strength or not. It's not just adding more recovery. That could be the case if you're training, 30 sets for biceps and hitting them every other day. That's possible. But something that I will mention is that during this time where I gained a lot of strength in my triceps, for probably more than half of that period of time, I trained my arms every second day. And doing, a mixed amount of volume, but at least 3 sets, up to 10 sets. And so on paper, that would be like, it's way too much. But my body was able to respond and see progress. And I'm not saying that's 100% what you should do, but I think the limit of what your body can adapt and respond to grows as you get more advanced. So I would classify my arm training at this point, doing that as a pretty extremely advanced area where I've already done a lot of the low-hanging fruit stuff to build up. And so now my body's built all that additional muscle and strength and it can handle that work. So I think that plays a role in how much volume and work your body can respond to. And so ultimately at the end of the day, you need to test things on yourself and then see how your body responds, which Vegas 911, you're doing a good job of here, but I think you're just misidentifying what indicator is leading to the lack of strength gain. And I think you need to open your mind to some of these other indicators being what's producing the lack of strength gain. That's my opinion. And the thing that I want to finish with is related to this. Does increased strength gain directly overlap with muscle gain? I've kind of talked about this a little bit more. And my take is that from my experience, what I've seen is that if you put all your marbles in the basket of strength gain, and I'm just going to prioritize gaining strength, and I don't want to do any of these other kind of training styles. I'm going to rest for long periods. I'm going to try to push maximum weights. I'm going to take extended recovery in between sets and recovery, in between workouts. I'm probably not going to try to do too much volume. I think you leave muscle gain on the table if you do that. And I think it's tendency to buy into one ideology or the other. And the flip side of that would be the more kind of bodybuilding style chasing a pump. where you're not as concerned about the weight. You're doing intensity techniques. The rest times are shorter. Maybe the frequency of training is even higher, and you're just sort of blasting the muscle, getting as much blood in there as possible and feeling a really intense burn and all this other stuff. I think these are kind of two separate approaches, and if you're familiar with the channel, you probably know what I'm going to say. Anybody who's new, I think a mix of the two is actually the best, and resisting the tendency to attach yourself to one or the other and reject the opposite, I think limits the amount of results that you can get, because I've seen benefit from both, and I've done extended periods of time where I just do one or the other, and having a mixture of them has led to the most muscle gain for me personally. And so the practical way to apply that is, I think there's two different ways I would suggest it, is that you do the beginning of your workout where you focus on strength and you try to progress and you track, you keep the exercises consistent, use an extended rest window, you superset back and forth, all this other stuff. And then the second half of the workout, you kind of throw all that out the window and you add in some intensity techniques, some drop sets, you shorten the rest time down, you vary the tempos, you get creative, and you add variety in, and you just chase a pump. There's a lot of different ways to get a pump. Or you alternate your workouts where if it's arms, chest, legs, whatever, one workout you focus on primarily on strength, where you use long rest times, chase numbers, all this stuff. And then the next time you come back, let's say that's your chest day, you're just benching, you do 5 sets and you rest 5 minutes in between. You do a 5x5. That's a standard, reasonable structure to use if you're trying to gain strength. Just as an example. I'm not saying that's for sure what you should do. Just an example. And then the next day you come in and you don't care about the weight. You shorten the rest times up a bit. You superset things. You add some drop sets in. You do some different tempos, and you just are like, I'm going to try to get the biggest pump possible and just blast myself. I think those would be the two most practical ways to apply it. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is that this workout that I've been showing here, where I'm doing these super fast explosive reps, I'm telling you, man, I know it looks wacky, and I know when I'm in the gym doing it, I see people looking at me sideways. I got the camera out and I'm just spamming, right? It looks kind of goofy. And I go down to partials at the end. It'd be really easy to look at that and be like, that's horrible form. That guy's an idiot. I'm telling you, I don't know what it is, but something about the fast reps in a higher rep range, so a bit of a lighter weight. So you want to be able to get 20 plus reps, 20, 30, 40 reps, going down to partials at the end and then doing a drop set or multiple drop sets of that, and then supersetting back and forth with tris and bis gives the most insane pump of your life, hands down. Nothing else I've done comes close to comparing. And I've got a lot of sick, wicked, nasty, gnarly, freaking arm pumps over the years. And up to this point in time, to date, that is by far the best way to get the most gnarly, insane pump of your life. So I'll leave you with that little nugget. As always, if you want to do any of my arm workouts, you can sign up for my site or check out my Only Arms. Subscribe there, where I upload the exact sessions and walk you through in a condensed short, video where you don't have to listen to me ramble on for 20 minutes, where I just give you the routines that I'm doing as I do them. Every day I record it and I pack it into a tight little video, upload it there. So if you want to follow along and do the exact workouts that I'm doing, you can check out my site. I also have tons of different courses, the Fuck Sleeves Arm Program, How to Build Massive Arms, Armzilla, video lessons where you have to listen to me ramble on. But I'm teaching you, I'm trying to spread the things that I've found and learned through my own experience-based lifting. It's not a law, it's not a 100% certainty. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree with me 100%, but I like to share. I like to experiment and be a little bit of a rogue, revolutionary, just trying shit. That's what fires me up. That's what gets me going. I'm just going to try some shit. And I'm going to try some more shit. And then I'm going to share it with you guys and say, this is what I've seen from doing this stuff. And then you can be the judge of how effective you think. And as I said before, try it out for yourself and see what happens. And then make a decision if it's good advice or not. Thanks for listening. Go make some arm gains. Have a great day. Peace.